In southern Florida, a 6-year-old boy goes out to play and is never seen again.
Every minute counts. With an individual that's 6 years old, obviously that raises the stakes.
The race to find him leads investigators into unfamiliar territory and to a terrifying theory.
One of the rumors floating around out there that Aji was the sacrifice of a voodoo doctor.
Then, a California co-ed vanishes on campus.
Her roommate came back from the long weekend, and that was when the alarm bell was finally sounded.
The primary eyewitness is also a potential prime suspect.
How do we know that everything that you've told us so far isn't really the truth?
But first, breaking news about another young woman who went missing not far from her college campus.
On June 3rd, 2011, Lauren Spear vanished after a night out on the town.
Our officers and detectives have been out looking around.
We'd like anyone who has seen her to please contact the Bloomington Police immediately.
The details surrounding the Indiana University sophomore's disappearance are slim, but telling. Just before 1 a.m. on June 3rd, Lauren leaves her apartment in Bloomington and heads to nearby Kilroy Sports Bar with friend and fellow student Corey Rossman. At 2:48 a.m., surveillance cameras capture the pair heading toward Rossman's apartment a block away. After assisting a visibly intoxicated Rossman home, Spear is believed to have visited the apartment of another friend, Rossman's neighbor and fellow IU student, Jason Rosenbaum. Then, at 4:30 a.m., cameras near Rossman's apartment complex catch Lauren exiting the building, presumably headed home. But Lauren Spear never makes it home. In fact, she is never heard from again.
As we are here today, again, pretty much at the 2-week mark, the bottom line is at this point, we still have a missing person.
Police questioned several eyewitnesses who saw Lauren that evening, including Corey Rossman and Jason Rosenbaum. But none are formally identified as suspects. And 6 weeks into the search for Lauren, investigators are no closer to solving the case.
Just like to say that Sunday is Father's Day, as everybody knows. And the greatest gift that Robbie could have is information about Lauren.
And to let your parents know that how much you love them. And the parents out there on Sunday, make sure that you let your children know how much you love them.
In 2005, I got the call telling me that my daughter, Natalie, had vanished. Every parent's worst nightmare became my reality.
I asked the world to help me.
I found myself in an unimaginable fight. But my search for answers gave me a new mission in life: bring the missing home and criminals to justice.
Nearly 2 decades before Lauren Spear vanished from the streets of Bloomington, Indiana, another young co-ed vanished under similar circumstances, though the investigations into these disappearances couldn't have been more different. In the spring of 1995, Stockton, California native Kristen Smart graduates from Lincoln High School and sets her sights on a life filled with new people and new places.
Kristen was our family's adventure seeker. Anytime there was an adventure to be had, she was on the page and ready to jump in.
She wasn't a follower, she was a leader. She did what she loved, and she was passionate about whatever she did.
That fall, Kristen enrolls at Cal Poly State University in San Luis Obispo.
What were Kristen's hopes and dreams for the future?
Kristen had always been interested in architecture. But in another breath, she might tell you that she wanted to be Joan London and have the opportunity to interview a lot of interesting people and travel the world. No one could tell her that anything was impossible.
Even with a heavy course load and a full social calendar, Kristen never forgets to call home.
She called home every Sunday night. It wasn't in the cell phone era where you could just do that easily, but she wanted to talk to everybody.
The same is true of May 24th, the Friday before Memorial Day. That night, while getting ready to go out, Kristen calls home and leaves a message for her parents.
It was before she went out to the party. And the message was, good news, I'll call you Sunday.
Kristen offers no further details about her good news, which makes her parents even more excited to talk to her. But Sunday evening comes and goes, and Kristen never calls.
On any other Sunday, you would have called, but because it was a long weekend, made the assumption that she would call on Monday.
But by noon on Memorial Day, there's still no word from Kristen. That afternoon, her roommate returns from a weekend trip and notices something strange. All of Kristen's personal belongings are there, but Kristen is nowhere to be found. When her roommate starts asking around, she discovers that no one has seen Kristen since Friday. She decides to contact campus police. Later that day, the phone finally rings at the Smart household. But it's not the call Kristen's parents have been waiting for.
It was a police officer from Cal Poly Police who called to say that they had some concerns about Kristen and had she come home for the weekend. And that's when your mother's instinct kicks in and you say, this is not right.
It appears Kristen Smart has vanished, but despite her mother's concerns, campus police are reluctant to file a missing persons report or start a formal search for Kristen.
The campus police believe that she may have simply taken a holiday and they thought that she was just traveling somewhere.
By Tuesday morning, there's still no word from Kristen. So Kristen's father, Stan, makes the 250-mile drive from the Smarts' home in Stockton to the Cal Poly campus. Once there, he persuades campus police to put up missing persons flyers. Officers also begin collecting eyewitness accounts from the night Kristen disappeared. Nearly all of them place Kristen on her way to Fraternity Row.
Kristen suggested that they go to one of the fraternity parties. Well, a couple of the girls had a test they needed to study for, and another girl almost went with her but opted out, and they left Kristen at the fraternity house.
So she's quite familiar with all of these people, right?
She knew people that were going to be there, and she would feel very confident, very comfortable about going there by herself and getting home.
Even though Kristen is underage, she is openly served alcohol at the party.
I don't know many college students that don't have a drink their freshman year in college, and especially at a frat party. You know, most people probably are drinking. Was she a heavy drinker? No.
But according to eyewitness accounts, by 1 a.m., Kristen is so intoxicated that 3 of her fellow students had to help her get back to her dorm.
Kristen was found in this grass area. Apparently, from this point is where they helped her up and started to walk her back to her dorm.
Campus police bring all 3 students in for questioning. They all tell the same story. Shortly after 2 a.m., they dropped Kristen off just a few yards from her dormitory before heading home themselves.
And that's the last that anyone's ever seen Kristen is walking towards their dorm.
But it appears Kristen never made it back to her room. Why? With no evidence of foul play on the part of the 3 students who walked Kristen home, police posed the theory that an intoxicated Kristen may have simply wandered off. But there are no eyewitness reports to confirm that theory. Days pass without a single clue to Kristen's whereabouts.
1 day goes by, 2 days go by. Before you know it, you have a map up on the wall in the kitchen to where you're marking locations of her last being sighted.
Not that the Smarts are giving up on their crusade to find Kristen.
Your heart is broken, but you can't let your will break because you have to be on your toes and you have to look for resources that can help you find your daughter.
The Smarts' efforts finally start paying off. News of Kristen's disappearance has spread throughout the region, and leads are pouring in.
They would get all these reports that she was seen in a drugstore, she was seen in another city. Wherever people said they saw her, my husband was in the car and he just drove to wherever that was. And it was all over California and Nevada.
Has Kristen simply run away? One sighting places her as far away as Canada. But like many others, it turns out to be a case of mistaken identity.
If you're a tall blonde, it's either, a curse or a cure because everybody's seen you.
The search for Kristen is back to square one. And the Smarts are beginning to believe something terrible has happened.
What is your initial instinct as to what has transpired to your daughter?
Well, something is just not right. She'd been harmed in some way.
In San Luis Obispo, California, Cal Poly student Kristen Smart leaves a fraternity party and vanishes without a single sign of struggle or foul play. At the urging of the Smart family, campus police enlist the help of the local district attorney's office. The DA's investigators start by re-examining transcripts from the initial eyewitness interviews. They quickly discover that one of the 3 fellow partygoers who escorted Kristen home, a 19-year-old food science major named Paul Flores, actually lingered with Kristen a little longer than her friends.
He promised the individual that was walking with them that he was going to get her home safely.
This new detail creates a gap in the timeline the night Kristen vanished, and means Paul Flores was the last one to see Kristen alive. This raises a huge red flag with investigators, and it's not the only one.
He had a black eye, he had scratches, which is not particularly compelling unless you're contacted by the police with regard to a disappearance.
Investigators grow even more suspicious when they learn many of Paul Flores' fellow students first noticed his injuries the day after Kristen vanished. They also tell investigators that multiple times Flores changed his story about how he got the injuries.
If he got them drunk falling into a bush, why didn't he say, "Gosh, I got drunk last night, I fell into a bush"? It's the lying about the physical injuries that makes the physical injuries far more compelling.
Because I didn't think it would matter.
On June 19th, investigators bring Flores in for further questioning and confront him about his injuries.
How do we know that everything that you've told us so far isn't really the truth? How do we know now that you lied for us?
Well, that wasn't important, though.
Sure it is. That's important.
Flores now tells investigators that he sustained the injuries when he hit his eye on his steering wheel while installing a car stereo. One aspect of Flores' story that doesn't change is the account of his last moments with Kristen.
I walked with her to where the driveway was, and I went up to my dorm because the walkway goes that way towards my dorm, and then she started walking that way.
Investigators have their doubts. They offer Flores a lie detector test, but he refuses. Still, it's not enough for investigators to charge Flores with any crime.
If they go forward without the best possible evidence on a thin or weaker case, and he's acquitted, then he walks for the rest of his life. He can never be retried. You want to have some compelling physical evidence.
But processing a potential kidnapping case isn't something either the DA's investigators or campus police are accustomed to doing. And on June 26th, the case is officially handed over to the San Luis Obispo Sheriff's Office.
We got the call that the Sheriff's Department would be taking over, which was just such a huge relief to us because our feeling was that professionals who knew how to deal with this type of situation were going to be on board.
Once on board, sheriff's officers bring a new urgency to the case.
The more time that goes by, the more potential loss of evidence, the more loss of memory or remembrance of specific information. So as time transpires, you're potentially losing information.
Within hours, deputies are combing the Cal Poly campus with cadaver dogs, hoping to uncover some trace of Kristen. They soon make a shocking discovery, one that seems to indelibly link Paul Flores to Kristen's disappearance.
There was only one room on campus where the dogs alerted, and that was in Paul Flores' room.
Cadaver dogs hit on the scent of human remains in Paul Flores' dorm room.
Right. So it has to be someone in the room who has touched or been near that scent of death.
All the dorm rooms, all the bedrooms, all the beds, they went to the corner of his bed and trash can.
The Smarts believe the odds that a cadaver dog would have incorrectly picked up the scent of Kristen's remains is slim, and suggests that either Kristen died in that particular location or died at the hands of someone who had recently been in that dorm room.
Paul's roommate, on the weekend she disappeared, was gone, and therefore Paul would know that he would have unfettered access to use his room. And therefore, Paul had an opportunity to get a girl that was under the influence back to his room.
It seems to be the break investigators have been looking for. But CSIs are unable to find any other clues in Paul Flores' dorm room. That's because, as the semester at Cal Polytech was coming to a close, campus police allowed the room to be cleaned and sanitized.
It's pathetic police work. It's terrible police work. They should have been in there with a forensic team vacuuming the room for fibers. And instead, they send in a maid service to clean the room up, and that destroyed evidence.
With no additional evidence, it is impossible for investigators to charge Paul Flores with any crime. So the sheriff's office obtains a search warrant for the Flores home in nearby Arroyo Grande, and they make another bizarre discovery.
They found multiple newspaper articles about Kristen under the mattresses.
One could argue that Paul kept those because he was directly or indirectly involved.
Still, it's not enough for police to charge Paul Flores with any crime.
What are the reasons investigators give you that Paul Flores has not been arrested?
We're told that the case can't move forward because A, there's no Kristen, and B, there's no weapon.
The Smart family believes they have all the proof they need. On November 26th, they file a civil suit against Paul Flores for the wrongful death of Kristen, hoping their case will bring the truth to light.
No one has any expectation that she is alive. She didn't disappear that night. She was killed that night.
But at his preliminary deposition, Flores refuses to confirm or deny the simplest of facts.
Did you attend a party at or near the Cal Poly campus in May of 1996?
On advice of my attorney, I refuse to answer that question.
Whenever he was asked questions about what happened, what led up to that evening, he asserted his Fifth Amendment.
I refuse to answer that question based on the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution.
With Flores now silent, the civil suit comes to a standstill.
We don't have any DNA evidence, and we don't have a weapon, and we don't have any marks, and we don't have any witnesses. That's a festering ground for reasonable doubt.
That he's made the conscious decision not to share that information is like stabbing someone in the heart. It's indescribable. Just indescribable.
But investigators haven't given up. More than 6 months after Kristen's disappearance, they initiate a search of a nearby rental property that's owned by the Flores family. During the search, the woman renting the house hands investigators something she found in the driveway. Something that's been missing as long as Kristen Smart. A turquoise earring.
The earrings were her favorite earrings. They were never found in her personal effects, even though none of her personal effects were gone from her room. That's a very compelling piece of evidence. That's damaging evidence.
But no sooner are the earrings tagged as evidence than the investigation suffers another in what seems to be a growing list of catastrophic setbacks.
It was subsequently placed in a desk drawer, misplaced, and lost forever.
Without this crucial piece of physical evidence, authorities still have no case against Paul Flores.
Sometimes the smallest piece of evidence can be the clinching piece of evidence, and in this case, it could have well been the earring.
The critical loss of time and evidence seem to have done irreparable damage to the case. 15 years later, the Smart family is no closer to understanding what happened the night their daughter vanished. But like Lawrence Spearer in 2011 and Natalie Holloway in 2005, Kristen's disappearance serves as a harrowing reminder of just how quickly a young woman's night out with friends can become a parent's worst nightmare.
Denise, there's so many similarities between Kristen's case and Natalie's case. What do you think happened?
She was taken advantage of, and I hope she accidentally lost her life. And that we can find her. We can't hope for what happened, but we can hope for the opportunity to, bring her home and lie her to rest.
Kristen Smart was last seen in San Luis Obispo, California on May 25, 1996. She is 6 feet 1 inch tall with dark blonde hair and brown eyes. Today, she would be 34 years old. If you have information about Kristen Smart or Lauren Spearer, please go to mylifetime.com/vanished and click on the tips button.
Every year, thousands of people immigrate to America in search of a better life for themselves and for their children. But one family's American dream became a nightmare when their 6-year-old son vanished in broad daylight, and the race to find him unearthed a string of chilling possibilities.
The small township of Farm Workers Village, just outside of Immokalee, Florida, is one of the most unique communities in America.
The community there consists of a lot of different nationalities, everything from Mexicans, Guatemalans, Hispanics, and also some Haitians.
Fellow immigrant Brian Clairvoy arrived from Haiti with dreams of becoming a police officer. Now a detective with Collier County, he protects and serves Farm Workers Village, whose residents work the produce fields and citrus groves of South Florida in pursuit of their own American dream.
What are some of the challenges working in a community that represents so many different cultures?
One of the difficulties that we have is basically the language barrier. But the fact that I speak Creole and I speak a little Spanish, that kind of gives me the advantage.
Would you say the Farm Village is a very tight community, very close-knit?
Without a doubt, yes, it is. Whether you're Hispanic or Haitian, it doesn't matter. Everybody pretty much know each other.
It's that togetherness that makes Farm Workers Village one of the safest communities in the area.
Kids play with each other and run around, but, everybody is watching over the kids.
But that all changes on January 10th, 2009. It starts that morning at the home of a Haitian immigrant named Mari Neda. While Mari gets ready for work, her boyfriend Antal is preparing to spend the day with Mari's son, Aji. Antal is not Aji's biological father. Aji's dad lives 700 miles away in Haiti. And Aji has a developmental delay that limits his vocabulary to less than 30 words. Still, he and Antal are inseparable.
The relationship was very close. And when his mother was working, then Aji would stay with Antal.
Et tout ça m'a fait, c'est ensemble avec Aji. S'il malade, moi, je suis un petit moi, et me considère tout comme un petit garçon.
Antal and Aji spend the morning of the 10th running errands together. That afternoon, the two of them pay a visit to Aji's grandmother, Jasula.
Et puis moi-même, je domino tout près. Dans 4 heures, il relève, mal bal manger, moi-même manger tout, dans 5 heures, dans la village. Elle aime venir dans la village, mettre radio dans l'endroit, pour laver les mouelles, prendre dans 6 heures, et me dit Jésus là, le relais Aji, fait le venir jouer devant porte là pour un qui j'en l'a joué.
After Antal leaves, Aji heads back outside to play in the front yard.
Aji was playing in the front yard at the end of the cul-de-sac with a bunch of other kids. And Grandma would check on him every 15, 20 minutes just to make sure that he was still out there and everything was okay.
At 5:30, Aji's grandmother checks on him again. But this time, Aji's not there.
Dis-moi, t'es là, oui? Non, pas à côté le fait. On dit où? Côté le fait là. On dit, t'es là, non, pas à côté le fait.
A few minutes later, Antal returns from the laundromat. Jasula informs him that Aji is missing. The two decide to split up and search the neighborhood for Aji.
Temps a passé, on commence à frapper porte, on frapper différentes portes là, côté me connaît moun, yo gen ti moun qui kon jouer avec Adi, yo di Madji pas là, li pas là, li pas là. Juste là me garder moi temps passé me les police.
They looked between buildings, they went down to the playground. It was dusk and other children are being called in by their parents to go home.
With each passing moment, Antal and Jasula become more and more anxious, but they hesitate to call the police.
Back in Haiti, the people just never had really much trust in the police for anything. So even when they come here to the United States, they still have the same mentality, thinking that the police is out to hurt them.
But by 7:30 p.m., there's still no sign of Aji, so his grandmother Jasula finally gives in. Moments later, deputies from the Collier County Sheriff's Department arrive at the scene.
Deputies were on scene probably within about 3 or 4 minutes. We had a small child missing, so they got everybody that was available to respond and started looking for Aji.
Local EMTs and even the FBI are called in to assist.
Every minute counts. With an individual that's 6 years old and has a lower mental capacity, obviously that raises the stake a little bit higher.
Complicating the search for Aji is the language barrier. Not one of the hundreds of families living in Farm Workers Village speak English as their native tongue.
Although somebody may speak fluent English, if their primary language is something different, there may be a word that I'm going to use that they're not going to understand.
Investigators call in Deputy Clairvoy to bridge the communication gap.
A lot of what I did was explain to them that if you give a little bit of information to the police, they just give them a little bit more avenue to do his investigative work.
And thanks to a conversation Officer Clairvoy has with one of Aji's neighbors, investigators discover Aji might not be missing, just hiding.
We found out that Aji would hide if he got scared. So we made it a point to check all the houses, any residence that was vacant, check the attics and the apartments, anywhere that a child could hide.
Were you still thinking, maybe he's just hiding? I'm just going to find him any moment?
Oui. Et là, moi-même, commencé à chercher. Moi-même avec Desir là, puis on tontonne, n'a cherché.
After an hour went by, the police were still looking for him, and they did not find him. Then at that time, Antal believed that this could be a very serious situation.
Just before midnight, Aji's mother Mari returns home after 16 hours at work. Her family informs her that Aji is missing.
Il avait venu dormir, il a dormi seul, comme si me sentais, comme si c'est mourir pour me mourir. Même baguette, ça m'a rien pour me faire. C'est retendre bon Dieu.
In the Florida community of Farm Workers Village, 6-year-old Aji Desir has vanished from his grandmother's front yard. But despite an extensive search by friends, family, and several branches of law enforcement, Aji is still missing. By 7:30 the following morning, investigators have brought in bloodhounds to aid in the search.
The scent dogs, bloodhounds, they picked up a scent that night, 3 different locations. The first one they got was right down along the fence line from the house here, all the way down the fence line, goes down about a quarter mile. The second track that they had came down back out here to Bell Circle, and the dogs tracked over to that area into the marshy area. They then got a track straight across the street where the kids were playing in the park and in the basketball court.
It's the second of the 3 scent tracks, the one leading to the marshes, that has investigators the most worried.
There's natural predators in that area. I've seen as big as, 10-foot alligators back in that area. There's Florida panthers, there's bobcats, various poisonous snakes.
If Aji is in the marsh, there's not a moment to lose. Search and rescue efforts kick into high gear.
This is probably one of the largest ground searches in Collier County Sheriff's Office history.
We had swamp buggies. We had canine out there, specialty dogs, cadaver dogs, floating over the water and walking through the woods. We were pulling the manhole covers off. We also did roadblocks. We stopped every car coming in and going out of Farm Workers Village.
As the search unfolds, it begins to draw national attention.
He is going to be scared. He is going to be hungry.
This was a big story. Aji's case was featured on national cable news shows. His face was on the cover of a national magazine.
The media attention triggers a wave of sightings from Miami to Canada.
We were tracking anything from Aji being seen at some church event or on an airline flight.
But after a week of searching and more than 200 reported leads, no real headway has been made. So investigators ultimately turn to the last people known to have seen Aji alive, his family. But questioning them proves difficult.
The grandmother was sobbing on her knees. It was hard to do an interview with her. She was choked up. Antel was more in disbelief. The mother, I think she was more in a daze, in shock would be a better way to describe it.
All 3 members of Aji's family are given lie detector tests. All 3 pass with flying colors. But one theory circulating through Farm Workers Village suggests that even though Aji's family had no direct role in his disappearance, they might be indirectly responsible. But not just for his disappearance, for his death.
There was some concern that Aji was taken to a voodoo doctor to rid him of the evil spirits that were causing him to have this special needs, and somehow conjured up in some of their minds that maybe something went wrong and he inadvertently passed away.
With no other leads, investigators begin looking into the voodoo angle, and a community that has been receptive to their previous search efforts immediately closes ranks.
They were afraid of the repercussion that the voodoo doctor in the neighborhood would put a curse on their family and then they would get sick or they would have money troubles.
It's not just locals that are fearful of the power of voodoo.
We had a student clerk that worked with us that did not want to go into some of the homes because she recognized some of the voodoo statues.
Could Aji have died at the hands of a voodoo doctor? And could his family be lying to police in an effort to cover it up? While voodoo is clearly practiced in the community, there is no concrete evidence linking it to Aji's disappearance. Determined to get to the bottom of this theory, police ask Mari, Jasula, and Antal to undergo 2 additional rounds of polygraph tests.
I think I did each one of them 3 times. I can't imagine. As a mother, I cannot imagine having my child go missing and then being looked at as a suspect.
Aji's family passes each and every one of their polygraphs, and on January 13th, they are officially eliminated as suspects. And the rumors of voodoo rituals and human sacrifice are put to rest once and for all. But there is one other member of Aji's family police need to clear as a suspect. His birth father, Yves Desir, who still lives in Haiti.
You've got to ask yourself, could the parent living in the other country want his son back?
Making the theory even more plausible is the close proximity of Farm Workers Village to the port of Miami, a known hotbed of human trafficking.
There's a possibility that he could have gone to Haiti on a cargo ship, because we all know that chances of him going on an airplane is super slim because of all the security, but it's not impossible to go through a cargo. It's not hard at all.
Mwile papa Aji Haiti, ma pala vele comme si ça pas il pas qu'il y a des sacs passés. Même si nous séparés, c'est vrai. Dieu Aji.
Based on the conversation, Mari is convinced Aji's father has nothing to do with their son's disappearance. Investigators aren't so sure. The FBI sends agents to Haiti and sets up surveillance on Aji's father.
We had our agents who travel over to Haiti frequently work with the Haitian authorities and actually interviewed him and identified the area where he was living in, and witnesses were interviewed over there, and we're confident that Aji didn't end up in Haiti.
But if Aji's father doesn't have him, then who does?
There were about 18 to 20 registered sex offenders that were living in Immokalee proper. There was one registered sex offender living in Farm Worker Village.
Police questioned Farm Workers Village lone registered sex offender, only to learn he was gambling at a casino at the time Aji disappeared. But in a community like Farm Workers Village, it's more likely Aji was taken by an unregistered sexual predator.
One of the problems with a migrant community is that they move state to state. So if you are a migrant worker who commits a sex crime, we don't know that you're a sex offender, so you are a threat that we don't know about.
It's now been 4 days since 6-year-old special needs child Aji Desir vanished from his grandmother's front yard. After exhausting every resource at their disposal, investigators are no closer to finding him. But if Aji was kidnapped, where is he now?
We still have not found the lead that we're looking for that would bring us closer to finding Aji.
Then, on January 13th, authorities received their most promising lead yet. A clerk at a nearby convenience store tells police they have surveillance video of Aji in the company of a grown man.
I looked at the videotape. I was convinced that it was Aji.
Not only does the boy in the surveillance video resemble Aji, the man he's with bears an uncanny resemblance to a neighbor. And when investigators dig into the man's alibi the day Aji disappeared, it raises even more questions.
He had gone into work late the day that Aji went missing. He was sweaty and real nervous. I mean, he was doing stuff that was certainly what we thought was suspicious at the time, so we didn't know if Aji maybe had slipped out with him at some point and was with him at a store.
Is the neighbor in the video Aji's captor? Police put together a lineup and asked the store's clerk to pick out the suspect.
The clerk picked out the person that we were looking into.
Investigators appeared to be on the verge of cracking the case. But while they are questioning the clerk, there's a bizarre turn of events.
While they were talking to the clerk, the individual just happened to come back into the store, and she identified the individual. That's the guy I'm talking about right there.
But it wasn't. It was a man who was with a child who looked very much like Aji. But, it wasn't him.
Left with no other viable leads, investigators call off the massive search for Aji. But a team of state and federal officers remains dedicated to solving the case.
The search has never stopped. It continues to this day. The case will never close until we find him.
That's what keeps you going. Finding him, bringing him back to his parents, reuniting him with his parents, locating him, and finding what happened to him provides the drive to continue on.
Et que ou prend moun nan prend, c'est besoin li prend. Mais c'est pas lui même bon Dieu te bail, c'est moi même bon Dieu te bail. Prends calme moi, bien servi avec elle. Parce que un jour, qu'aujourd'hui m'a besoin de petite moi encore.
S'il t'a venu la Cali un jeudi, c'est une grande victoire pour nous. Et nous bien contents avec le travail que les médias ont fait, avec le travail que la recherche a fait, la police a fait, pour voir si Aji était capable de venir. Nous toujours pensé qu'avec les gens de travail, nous avons espoir et nous pensons qu'il n'est pas venu aujourd'hui à la venir demain.
Though no one can say for sure what happened the day Aji vanished, investigators believe he was most likely abducted by someone living in or around Farm Workers Village. But by now, Aji could be anywhere, and so could the tip that finally brings him home. Let's work together to bring the missing home and criminals to justice, because someone out there knows something.
Aji Desir was last seen in January of 2009. At the time, he was 3 feet tall and weighed 45 pounds. Aji has black hair and dark eyes. He understands Creole and English, but rarely speaks. Aji would be 8 years old. If you have information about the missing people seen tonight, please go to mylifetime.com/vanished and click on the tips button.
I know it's hard to put into words, but what do you miss most about Kristen?
Well, I'm sure like you would say you miss Natalie. I miss Kristen. Everyone in our family misses Kristen. We just miss her as a whole being. We can say we miss her smile, we miss her hugs, but mostly what we miss is just the spirit and the presence of someone who unconditionally loved her family. She was our cheerleader.